Welcome to the Sportsman Show. Glad you could all come out. This is the last show of the day over here. I get to be tailwind Charlie here. I'll tell you a little bit about myself. My name's Doug Stewart. I live on, my wife and I live on Buckeye Lake waterfront. We're one of 400 homes that are on the new dam at Buckeye Lake. One of the nice things about it is living there is I just found out from the ODNR yesterday that Buckeye Lake is the #1 Saugeye lake in the state, which doesn't surprise me, the amount of fish that we catch there. But you guys have some real nice lakes up around here too. The ones that they listed yesterday in this area, it's pretty incredible. Buckeye Lake is first, Indian Lake, Alum Creek, Cedar Creek, Tappan, Clendening, Atwood, Piedmont, Licking River, O'Shaughnessy, and Hoover. Well, I fish a lot of those in the Columbus, Central Ohio area, but there's quite a few of them up in this area too. So if you learn my jigging method, you'll be able to catch fish in all those lakes. I was fortunate enough to have a daughter that became a flight attendant 21 years ago, and she works for Southwest Airlines, married a pilot. The wife and I have been flying free since she got that job. They bought a house in Orlando and built an apartment above their garage for us, and I bought a boat down there, a little Carolina skiff that I can go down and fish with my grandson anytime I want. And so I'll be ice fishing on Buckeye Lake one day. You'll see my Facebook post, and the next day I'll be in a t-shirt bass fishing in Florida. So my buddies call up to go fishing, and they have to ask where I'm at before they know know whether we're going to be able to go or not. They never know where I'm at. But living on Buckeye Lake is nice, but I've traveled all over the state of Ohio fishing almost every lake and river at some point or another. I fish for all different species, but I'm most noted for my saugeye fishing and my ice fishing. So, but on the saugeye fishing, I'm kind of a one-hit wonder. About 10 years ago, 10, 12 years ago, I started jig fishing with a particular method. I kind of perfected it, and I quit buying lures. I was wasting a ton of money on lures. I probably have stacks and stacks of boxes of lures at the house that I'll never use, because I found that if I have one bait that imitates what the fish like, that looks like a minnow or a shad, that they eat in a natural color, I catch them on it. From the time the ice is off until the ice is back on, I catch them on the same lure. In fact, this same lure, the same jig, I catch the largemouth and crappie in Florida on the same jig in the wintertime down there. I catch trout, cutthroat trout and rainbow trout out west in the western states on the same exact jig. I catch walleye in Lake Erie on the same jig. I catch smallmouth in Maine the same way. This jig, it imitates a natural looking bait, what they eat, and I'm going to go over what I do with it. Now, when I post pictures on Facebook, and you're welcome to follow me on Facebook if you want, I post the catches. I fish almost every day, so I post what I catch, most of the fish I release. When I post these fish, the first thing people ask me is, well, what lure were you using? And they want to run out and buy that lure, looking for the magic lure, that if they put that on their rod, they're going to go and catch fish just like I am. That's what we all have done. I did it myself. When you see the guy next to you catching fish, you go and buy that lure. And it doesn't always work like that. What I found is that the lure is 50% of what catching the fish is all about. The other 50% is the rod, the reel, the line, and the knot that I use. If you don't have the right tool for the job, it's like using a hammer for a screwdriver. It doesn't work. So I prefer a 7-foot medium light fast action rod. It's perfect for jigging. That's exactly what you want to get. You can spend as much money as you want or as little as you want. Just get what you can afford. Just because you go out and buy a $80,000 bass boat, it won't make you a bass fisherman. Just like buying the very most expensive rod and reel, it doesn't make you an automatic fisherman because you spent the most money. The fish really don't care. But it is nice to have the most sensitive and nicest rod that you can get for your money. But 7-foot medium light fast action, that's what you want to get. Then you want to get a reel that is matched to the rod. Quite often I see people will have a big monstrous reel on a rod that it wasn't set up for. It wasn't designed for that. I use 8-pound test line, so every reel that you see will have 3 line sizes on it. This particular size, this 2500 Shimano reel, has 3 sizes. It's a 6, 8, and 10. And that's what it says on the side of it, recommended line sizes. You want to use the middle one. That's the one that's most likely to be the best for that reel. The middle one, 8-pound test. Then we go into the line, what line I use. I like using the cheapest line I can get that works. And that's Berkeley Vanish 100% fluorocarbon line. It's the cheapest fluorocarbon line you can get. There's good things about fluorocarbon line and bad things. First, the good things, this line is invisible to the fish. They can't see it, neither can 65-year-old men trying to tie knots with it. Very difficult. But this is my favorite line right here. And the reason being, like I say, first, fish can't see it. Second is that it sinks, where monofilament line floats. So if you're using a very light jig, if you're using an 1/8 ounce jig, and you're fishing in 20, 30 feet of water, the weight of that jig, you're not going to feel it as much because that line is floating and pulling up on that jig. So you don't feel it on the tip of your rod. When you get a hit, you're not going to feel it as good as you can with this line that sinks. With it sinking, you got contact with that jig. Even a light 1/8 ounce, you'll feel it way better with the fluorocarbon line. Plus, the fluoro doesn't have as much stretch as the mono line. The mono line has a lot more stretch. This does have a little stretch, but not anything like the monofilament line. The other thing is what kind of knot that I use. Quite often I see people putting snap swivels on their lures or on their jigs, and they will take away from the action of your lure. You'd be surprised at how much action you lose on a crankbait or even on a jig when it weights it in the front like that with just a snap swivel on it. And when I'd see people using snap swivels, they'd come out to fish with me, I'd ask them, well, why are you using that snap swivel? And they say, well, because I can change lures real fast. And I said, well, then why don't you just tie on the lure that works all the time like I do? Just tie on one lure and then you don't have to use a snap swivel. I use this one from the time the ice is off until the ice goes back on the lake. So I don't need a snap swivel. The only time I need to change it is when I break off or I hook into a big fish and tear up my line. So what I do is I tie a what they call a Uni Knot. Uni Knot is it's most commonly known for tying 2 lines together, like the fly fishermen use it for tying their leaders onto their fly line. But a double Uni Knot is what they use. Well, I use this Uni Knot. The reason I do is it leaves a nice loop so that your lure works around and wiggles and flops around, and you'll get much more action out of a crankbait. I never use anything on a crankbait. Now, you do need a snap swivel on certain lures, like certain spinners. You have to use one, otherwise it's going to twist your line up too bad. There's certain blade baits in that it'll cut your line if you don't use a snap swivel on. So there are a few lures that I do recommend. I need a volunteer. You want to come up and help me, buddy? I need you to hold this is my crappie lure. I got bigger ones for Saugeyes, but this is my crappie lure. So this is the knot I tie. It's pretty simple once you get used to it. I suggest that you learn it on line or string or something first before you try tying it on fishing line so you get the hang of it. Basically, you go through the eye of whatever you're tying it on, and you make a loop, and you just go through the hole 6 or 7 times. Make sure you go around both of the lines as you do that. Then you just pull the tag end up, you slide it down. You want to leave about a 1/2 inch loop on every lure and jig that you tie. You want to leave about a 1/2 inch. That's about the ideal length. Then you wet it and tighten down, pull down on the tag end and slide it and tighten it up while it's wet. Otherwise it'll burn the line if you don't do it when it's wet. And then you leave that 1/2 inch loop. So we'll do that one more time. I'll show you one more time. This is called the Uni Knot. If you look it up on the internet, you can find fishing knots. If you look up fishing knots, it's the very last one because it starts with a U. It's called a Uni Knot. So once again, you go through the eye, double the line over, make a hole, just go around the double line, go through there 6 or 7 times. And don't be afraid of using a lot of line to do it at first until you get used to it. You want to have more line than you would think. So make it easier for you. Then slide it down, wet it, tighten it down nice and tight. Now, the reason I like this knot is because if I'm throwing a jig or a crankbait for a long time during the day, that line will wear out right there on that eye. That's where it's going to get the most abuse, rubbing back and forth while it's wiggling or when I'm pulling a jig through the rocks. So when I hook into a big fish, first thing that happens is that line will tighten up. Now I just took that bad part of that line and it just slid up through. Maybe it had a little nick in it right there that made it only 90% as strong as what the other line is, but it didn't rub it against anything with all the pressure of fighting a fish now. So it's out here where it's not going to snap off on me. So I lose a lot less fish that way. All right, thank you, sir. Here, I have something for you. Give you some jigs. There's you some jigs, and this is the color that I use most often. This is the Berkeley 4-inch power bait smelt colored minnow. That's the lure I use 90% of the time. It's pretty much all I use. Take those jig heads and you put that tail on. Take one of those tails off and put that tail on and you will catch fish, guaranteed.
Good. Thank you.
So this is what they come in. They come in a pack. The Berkeley Power Bait minnows. I think there's 10 in a pack. Yeah, 10 in a pack, 10 count. Now, occasionally I will get other colors. If the water's a little murky, sometimes I go with a white. If we've had a lot of rain, I'll go with a white one. And people ask me, well, it doesn't have a twister tail or a paddle tail. It's not going to attract the fish. So when you see 3 different lures on a shelf, the one that has a straight tail like that, that's the one that's left there on the rack. Everybody buys the paddle tail and the twister tail, and they leave these because they think there's no action to them. Well, you put the action in it with these. With the paddle tail, it's like a tail on a kite. When it falls down in the water, that tail on it makes it go straight down, and when you lift it up, it goes straight back up. With this, it'll roll and twist, and it turns on its side a little bit, and it gets a flash of light to the fish off the side of it, and it triggers an instinct hit. They see it, and they can't resist hitting it, even if they're not hungry. When the fish are hungry, almost any lure will work. I think there's times on my lake, on my home lake, that you could probably put a cigarette butt on a jig hook and they would hit it when they're really on. But 90% of the time, they're not feeding when you're out there, and you have to trigger this instinct hit to catch them. Saugeys can be really tough at times. But this is the bait that I use most of the time, the 4-inch, and I use either 2 types of jig heads. They were selling some of these over one of the vendors over there. These are Northland Mimik Minnow jig heads. I bought them in bulk wherever I can find them. I used to buy these from Northland directly, just the heads alone, and I'd buy them 25 at a time. They were 80 cents a piece. Well, I went to order them one time, and they said, you know, we don't sell them like that anymore. And I said, well, how do you sell them? They said, well, you can only get them now with the 2 paddle tails and two of them in a pack. Now they're $3.50 at Walmart instead of what I was paying 80 cents for. So I buy these and I take the tails off. I have boxes and boxes of the tails I don't use. I don't use the paddle tails. I don't use the twister tails. And I don't use these tails. These are an older version of the Northland that they made. I really don't like the colorings of those. They're not that good. But I buy them for the heads. All I'm looking for are the heads. These are Northland, Mimik, Minnow jig heads. And the reason I like them is the keeper hook on them. They have a nice little hook on the top of them, and then they have a wire on the bottom of them. So when I thread that soft bait on there, it stays on there for quite a while. I can catch quite a few fish without it tearing up the jig. These are probably the best to hold the jig on. And but when I put one of these on, it's very important. This is very important. I usually cut a little bit off of the nose of it because they're not always straight and square. I want it to butt up right up to the head to where it almost matches the head, so I don't have anything sticking out sideways or anything to change the action of the lure. You want it exactly straight. And when you thread one on, you want to make sure that it's exactly straight. You don't want a kink in it or anything else. You'll know when you have it right because that lure will glide through the water right back at you. If it rolls and twists or anything like that, you didn't get it exactly straight. It's best to do these. I do them in the living room. The wife doesn't like it because they smell, you know, when I'm doing it. She doesn't like it when I open up the pack and I smell up the living room. But I make these up at home rather than doing it in the boat when I'm bouncing around in the boat. So I'll make them up. I have them in the pack ready to go when I take people out fishing. But 90% of the time, I use the 1/4 ounce, mostly in 10 foot of water or less. I use the 1/4 ounce when they're really active. When I get into 6 foot of water or less, I go with the 1/8 ounce heads. So 4-inch tail, 1/8 ounce head. That's in the information sheet. A lot of that's in there, so you'll have that. Now, Northland, like I said, was selling these at Walmart, 2 for $3.50. Well, I went into Walmart one time and I saw they had these little Ozark Trail jig heads. Now they only sell them in an 1/8 ounce, but they were 97 cents. So I got 2 for 97 cents. Of course, they got a paddle tail. I didn't want the paddle tail, so I take those off. I got boxes and boxes of the paddle tails that I don't use. These are a lot cheaper, so when I take people out and they start snagging up and breaking off my jig heads that cost $3.53, then they start getting the 97-cent ones. Because I'm cheap like that. My sponsor doesn't give me a very good budget, you know, to buy fishing stuff. She's working 5 days a week to support me in a manner I'm accustomed to while I'm out fishing every day. But she does get really, really jealous when I go to Florida around the grandkids. She doesn't really care that I'm down there and it's warm and I'm having fun fishing. It's just that she doesn't like it when I'm around the grandkids and she has to work. So, are there any questions so far? Anything? Any questions about saugeye fishing? Any of your lakes around here?
What certain color do you get better?
Yeah, okay, that's a good question. He asked if there's any color of jig head that's better. When I could buy them from Northland, I always bought a natural color, like a clear. I think it's this was the color that I bought. It's kind of a bluish white with a little red on it. That was the color. I forget what they call it. I think they maybe called it rainbow trout. but it kind of looked natural with the 4-inch smelt. And that was the color that I bought. Well, when I couldn't get them anymore, I started buying up every color that I could find. When I go into the shows like this, and they would have them discounted, like they're selling these over there, one of the vendors, for $1.50 a piece. So that's $3, and Walmart's $3.53 or something. So it's a little bit of a discount, but they are selling these, one of the vendors over there. So I bought up every color I could find because as cheap as I could get them, rather than paying the full price. So I've tried all the colors, and I really haven't found that it made too much of a difference. Sometimes I'd use a chartreuse one, or all the different various colors that they had, and it didn't seem to make much difference. But I did pick the natural colors when I could. Now Walmart, the ones they sell, they have these, the 2 for 97 cents. They only come in this chartreuse and a blue one. So you can only get them in 2 colors. So I've bought them both, and we've caught fish just as much on either one. Haven't seen too much of a difference. So if that answers your question. Any other questions?
Hey Doug, when you tied the knot there, you cut down the middle piece of it, you always rip it off.
Oh, okay, yeah, you asked about when I tie the knot, and you have a tag end on it, you want to cut that off really close, but not so close that it's into the knot. You want to leave, just a little bit out. If you leave too much out, it'll take away from the action of the jig. So just cut it off, but don't cut it right next to the knot because it can slip through. So just leave a tiny little bit when you on the tag end when you cut it off. And my dentist says you need to use line clippers. When I was guiding, I took some dentists out, and when they saw me bite the line off, they weren't real thrilled with me there. Like, you're not supposed to do that. But line clippers is best. So yeah, yep, there you go.
Exactly what happens.
Yeah, don't bite the line off. And that line, especially that fluorocarbon line, is really tough. Now the other thing too is you can still buy these. These are Berkeley power bait reel sticks. Okay, they sell these. These are 3-inch, and they come 2 of them with already with a jig head on them. They're an 1/8 ounce. They already come. Not a good jig head, but it's okay. I mean, it's a ball head jig. I don't like them as much, but they come already rigged up, so those work. You can still buy these at certain stores. 6 of them, I think, or 8 of them in the pack. 2 of them already rigged up. Now, in the colder months, I go from the 4-inch down to the 3-inch. Because a lot of times in the winter, they're more apt to hit a smaller bait. In the colder, in the late fall, I'll switch up to the 3-inch. And also, a lot of times I get them just nipping the tail. I'll feel them nip it, and they didn't really take the whole jig in. Usually in the warmer months, they hit it, and they hit that thing so good that you get a big hook in them, and it's solid in them. But in the colder months, a lot of times they just nip at it. So what I do in that case is I buy these stinger hooks. You can get them. Northland sells some like this. These are 2-inch ones. So in the 3-inch lures, I buy a 2-inch stinger hook, so that I hook it across the hook, so that it looks like so. I hook the stinger hook on the hook like that, and then have it hooked back in the back part of it. You want to try to keep that line as straight as you can when you hook that stinger hook in there. You want to be able to, you don't want it to take away from the action of the lure. This is a little bit bigger stinger hook, but I buy these from Netcraft up in Toledo. That's where I get all my stinger hooks from, is from Netcraft. And I get different ones. I get the 3-inch ones and use those in the 4-inch jigs, and I use the 2-inch ones in the 3-inch jigs. But when you're using the stinger hooks, if they're swallowing the whole bait, you really don't want to use the stinger hook, because a lot of times you'll lose the fish because the little hook catches and you don't get the big hook in them as well. So if they're swallowing the whole thing, then you probably want to take the stinger hook off. But if you're getting a lot of them just nipping at the tail, you feel them nip it and you don't catch the fish, then you're going to catch twice as many if you have the stinger hook on. So just keep that in mind when you're using it. Any other questions before I get up on the tank and show you some of this stuff up there?
You ice fishing for Saugeye?
Yeah, he asked if I'm ice fishing for Saugeye, and absolutely. When I left my house yesterday morning, I augured holes. It was almost 6 inches of ice in front of my house. I live right on the dam at Buckeye Lake, and today the guys told me I left. I could hear the ice moaning and groaning last night, man. It was making ice, you know, it was so cold. And they told me they had 7 inches of ice out there now. When I left, I looked out with the binoculars and I could probably see 40 shanties on the lake. So they are ice fishing. I don't know how well they're doing. I won't know until I get back home and start seeing the Facebook posts and see what everybody's doing. But I'll be out there on the lake ice fishing. Now, I don't use this jig when I'm ice fishing, although the past few years when we didn't have ice, when it was not froze up very good, I was going out in my boat and had some of my better trips in January and February. In my boat, I was the only boat on the whole lake. You know, who else would be crazy enough to go out there, okay? So it was freezing cold. I had my ice fishing gear on so I wouldn't freeze to death. And my flotation suit, if I fell out, because the water temperature was probably 35 or 37, and I caught 2 25-inchers in 15 minutes on the one trip, plus the other, you know, half a dozen other fish that I caught. So, and it was in the places where I was ice fishing, where I'd normally be ice fishing, and I'm catching them on one of these jigs in January and February. So they are ice fishing, and it looks like with the extended forecast, Buckeye Lake's going to be on fire with people out there ice fishing. This season has been kind of crazy with the ice because the bigger lakes did not freeze up fast. The deeper lakes, they were so warm from all the warm weather we had that now, just because it's really cold like this, they still aren't freezing up good. Some of the coves are, and even some of the ponds haven't froze good. Even up north here, I noticed, you know, I see open water in different places, and so it's kind of scary. You got to be careful where you're going. Buckeye Lake is probably relatively safe right now to go out in most areas. So, any other questions before I go up on the tank? Anything? All right. Well, I'm going to show you another method, and I'll, you know, not all of us get the fortune of having a boat, having a nice sponsor like I do that goes and pays for all of it. But this is a method that you can use offshore, okay? This is a homemade Slinky sinker that I make myself, and I'll show you how I do that. This is a floating styrofoam jig head, okay, so it floats. Now you can rig these up. You can use different sizes. You can use smaller sizes. You can use it for crappie. You can put a live minnow on it and tight line this. A lot of times in front of the house, I'll have the grandkids will throw these out with a live minnow on the floating jig head, and then just put it in the rod holder and tighten the line up. And then when the line goes slack, you know that something's lifted that sinker up and is swimming away with the minnow. But this is basically tent cord that you can buy. You can use a lot of different things. If your wife has some boots with some nice shoelaces, you know, like this, you can take them out when she's not around and make some Slinky sinkers out of them. You know, she can just, you know, wear them and let them fall off, whatever. You know, you figure that out where they went. Who knows? But this is tent cord. What you do is you pull out that inner piece of nylon or whatever, you know, whatever cord is inside of that, and you'll have like basically a tube of nylon. These are here. I'll pass one around so you can see what it's like. But I take a snap swivel. And I hook a snap swivel in the end of it to hold it and tie the line onto. And you can make these any length you want. So the longer you make it, the heavier it weighs. You can cast it a mile, but it doesn't get snagged up. It'll go through rocks. Or the first place that I started using these was down below the spillways when I'd fish for saugeyes the guys were all throwing 3-inch lead head twister tails and getting snagged up in the rocks, and they would lose 10 to every one of these that I would lose. But I would tie on, I'd have a heavier main line, so you could use whatever size line you wanted to the sinker, but not too big, but you could go with a 10-pound test or even a braided line if you wanted to the sinker, and then tie like an 8-pound fluorocarbon leader. You can use whatever length. This is set up for on the bottom fishing, floating up off the bottom for the Saugeyes. But you could put a 2-foot leader on there if you're fishing down below the races. Whatever is working the best. But if you do put a minnow or a twister tail or whatever, you got to remember this is floating up off the bottom. So if you put a minnow on there, it's going to be upside down if you put it on like you would a normal jig head. If you're thinking in a normal jig, the hook's turned up this way. On this, it's upside down because it's floating up off the bottom. This is basically like using a bobber, only off of the bottom instead of down from the top. Now, I used to do this. I used to keep a rod like this in my truck. So on the way to work, if I had a half an hour before work and I was going by a lake, I'd just stop there and I'd take this and I'd make a long cast, fire it out, and just crank it across the bottom real slow and wait. And the difference in this is you really don't feel the hit. What you feel is all of a sudden you don't feel the sinker anymore. That's when something lifted it up. You don't feel the sinker, then you set the hook because you know something just took that weight. So it takes a little bit of getting used to, but I caught a lot of fish just like that, standing on the shore in different places and below the spillways, especially. There's always a lot of line and snags and this and that. What would happen is if the jig did get hung up in something, usually it's floating over it, the sinker would go through it, but the jig would go over it. But if it did get hung up in some line or something, and I broke it off, a lot of times this floating jig head would float up, and it'd come floating in the current right back to me, and I didn't lose it at all. But the guys throwing the 3-inch, quarter-ounce lead heads would lose 10 of them before I would lose one of these. And not only that, I was able to cast in places that they couldn't even get to. With the length of the sinkers that I made some little longer ones where I could cast clear over to the base of the dam where they couldn't even come close to casting in those spots. So I was hitting places that nobody else could with this bait. But the way I make those is, like I said, I have a little tool that I made. It's a little piece of brass tubing, and you just stick that in the end, and like so, and then you take a bag of where are they? Now I've got some BB split shots, but you just take the BB split shots, you drop them down in the tube, and then you have something to push them down in. This is a fast way of doing it. It's faster than doing them one at a time. But you don't want to use the BB split shots that have the little pinch thing on them, because they'll get snagged up on the nylon in there. Make sure whatever you're using is round lead or whatever material. If you use tungsten or something like that, whatever you use, make sure it's nice and round so it goes in there, and the right size. If you get too big, it isn't going to want to go in there. So get the right size. BB split shots seem to work best on most of the nylon cord I get. But you can make those any length that you want, and then once you stuff them full of the BBs, you take a lighter and light the end and pinch it close so it'll melt together, but don't do it with your fingers. You'll only do that one time because it will stick to you. Don't do that. And then melt the other end closed, pinch it off with a pair of pliers, and then stick your snap spool in it, and that gives you a point to tie onto. Like I say, use a heavier main line, a lighter leader. You can make it whatever you want. You can put minnows on there. You can put a jig on there. You can put whatever. You could go to a pond and put a night crawler on there on a bigger floating jig like that, and probably catch bass like crazy by dragging that across the bottom. That worm would be working its way, a foot or two up, and as you drag this across the bottom, it wiggles around. So I'm going to go up on the tank. I'm going to show you what these look like up there. Now Dan goes on before me, and he throws in gummy worms and minnows and wormers and hot dogs and everything else. Every time I go on a show behind Dan, the fish are not hungry. He feeds them everything. So we'll see what they're doing today. Okay, so first, I'm going to show you the, now this is an 1/8 ounce. This is a Walmart jig, one of the 2 for 97 cents. I cut the hook off of it because they don't like it when I catch their fish here. And that's a 4-inch power bait, smelt colored. There, I got it right at the end too. So you see how that goes down? It flutters and twists and roll, and that's what you want to see. Now, what I do with it is I do lift and flutter, and that's why I use the longer 7-foot rod. I lift and flutter. I lift it up, I let it flutter back down. The Saugeye always hit it right before it hits the bottom. When it's going back down, there's something about it, it triggers an instinct hit every time. When I lift it up and flutter it down, that's when they hit it, right before it hits the bottom. So if you're fishing shallow water, you want to make long casts. I park in a spot in shallow water, 6 to 10 feet, whatever it is. Oh, somebody won it? Looked like somebody had it in there, didn't they? So, what? Okay. I guess he didn't get enough of Dan's food, did he? Oh. So, I use this thing all over the country too. That's what's crazy is I've used this same bait when I was down visiting the daughter in Orlando over Christmas. We went down for a couple weeks. I caught an 8-pounder on this same exact jig that I used for the Saugeye. Same way. You just lift and flutter. I was going on the outside of the weed lines down there, and I'd throw it, and I was catching crappie and crappie and largemouth bass, just working along the edges of the weeds and doing that hopping and fluttering. And I caught an 8-pounder. I caught a bunch of other ones, but my best one was an 8-pounder. But this is a bait. And then also, if you're fishing deeper water, you can vertical jig. You can vertical jig with this bait. You know, out of the side of the boat, just drop it down, figure out where the bottom is when you can feel the bottom, and lift it and let it flutter down. You can lift it up and let it flutter down like so. When you lift it and let it flutter, it's always, with the Saugeye, it's always right before it hits the bottom is where they hit. They see it and they dart in and they'll hit it. But that's how I do that. And if they're more active, the 1/4 ounce works better, especially if you're in a little deeper water. This is pretty shallow water, but on my lake, Buckeye Lake, the average depth on the lake is 6 feet. So when I'm in deep water there, I might be in 7 feet. so it's a little bit different fishing there, but it's one of the top 10 lakes. It is the top lake in the state for Saugeyes this year, so interesting to know. But yeah, I'll do long casts, lift and flutter, lift and flutter. And the key to it too is making sure you constantly have contact with that jig. If you don't have your line tight, if you let it flutter down and you're just letting it fall on a loose line, you won't feel the hit. You have to crank your reel At the same time, you're letting it flutter down so you keep constant contact with that jig. When I'm working it along the bottom, I can feel every rock and pebble because I have contact with it at all times. I never let it go slack. You know, if I let it go like this and I just let it fall like that, I'll never know I had a hit. Never know I had a hit. They'll be gone by the time I pick it back up and get hold of it. They'd already hit it and spit it back out. But what you want to do is you want to keep constant contact with it like this. Constant. So I can always feel, I know exactly when they hit it. And the Saugeys will, you'll know you have a hit most of the time. You'll feel it. You'll feel that jolt. Other than when it gets real cold out. So like I said, the other method that I use, and I do this like say if I'm out on shore, if I don't have the boat with me, or out on the dock with the grandkids, I set them up with this. This is easy enough to do. Like I say, you can put a live minnow on it. This is also a 4-inch smelt colored power bait minnow. Whoops, I didn't do a very good cast there. With this, as you can see, the jig is floating up off of the bottom, and then if I move it a little bit, it wiggles a little bit. It looks kind of lively. They think it's something to eat. Sometimes they'll chase it. Sometimes they'll just, you know, you don't have to do a whole lot. Sometimes they'll just, especially if you have a live minnow on there, you can just leave it set and they'll come over and they'll hit that thing. But if you're working it, like below the dams, you know, I keep it moving. I always kept it moving, so I didn't get hung up in the rocks. I'm not making very good casts today. But as you can see, you just move it a little bit like so. And then I know when they hit it is I don't feel the sinker anymore. They lift it up, they take off with it, and that's how I know I have a bite. It's almost the opposite. Instead of feeling a hit, you don't feel anything. That's how you know you have one, is when you don't feel anything. So, any questions about any of these two jigs? Anything? Yes, sir.
Do you anchor your boat or do you drift?
Okay, it's a good question. He asked, do I anchor my boat or do I drift? And I do all of those things. But quite often, when I have a lot of other people in the boat with me, I can take up to 3 people with me in my boat. I'll anchor. I'll put the anchor down, and we'll have as many as four of us in the boat, casting in different directions and fan casting and just working each area. And I have a talon anchor on the back of the boat, so I can just stop wherever I want. And then if I'm in an area that's a good, nice rocky bottom, a nice flat, then we'll drift. I'll pull it up and we'll drift down, 50, 100 feet or so, and then do it again, and then just work that whole area over like that. That's one of the most effective ways. Now, other times when it's not very windy and I can just slowly drift along, I'll drift along and cast. Other times we'll use the electric trolling motor and work along a shoreline. Like some of the rocky shorelines, we'll take jigs like that. I'll have everybody on one side of the boat, and we'll just cast up to the rocks and hop it down off of the rocks. And usually at the base of the rocks is where is where the fish will be. Usually if there's a rock line shoreline, they'll be right along the base of those rocks. So we do cast, we do drift. On the bigger lakes, the deeper lakes, quite often I'm moving slow and I'm casting up. You always want to cast up into the shallow water and bring it down deeper, because you're lifting and fluttering and letting it go down. So if you're fishing a rocky point, you want to cast up to the shallow part of it and then hop that thing down the flat and then off of the edges. Anytime, usually when you come off of a ledge or whatever, and on my lake, a ledge is only 1 foot. when your average depth of your lake is only 6 feet, a drop off is 1 foot on my lake, where that might be 10 feet on another lake. So, but I do fish all the other lakes too. I fished Piedmont and Atwood and Leesville and West Branch, and all those lakes have good saugeye populations. And if you learn this jigging method, but just keep in mind, it's 50% the lure and 50% the rod, reel, line, and knot. If you miss out on any part of that, you're gonna take a certain percentage off of what you're gonna catch. So I've had guys that went on guide trips with me, and they wanted to find out the spots that I was fishing. So that's why they hired me. They just wanted me one time to take them out and show them where all I was fishing. And then the next day or so, I'd see them out there, 3 guys in a boat, and ask them how they're doing, and they weren't catching any. But yet the guys I had that day, we had a lot of them in the boat, and they were in the same spots that we were in. But what they did is they didn't listen to what I told them about the method. All they had was the spot, and they had the lure. They went and bought the lures, and they came back with their gear, and they didn't catch any fish. So, like I say, it's 50% the lure, 50% the rod and reel. I'll come down off the tank, and if you have any other questions, or if you'd like to come up and look at the gear and talk about the gear individually, you're welcome to do that. If you didn't get one of the information sheets, I have several of them left. Did you get enough? Yeah, if you didn't get one of these, this has all the information on jigging. So, yeah, absolutely. This gives you everything. It's all broke down on there. And if you'd like to contact me on Facebook, or want a friend request me, that's fine. I have daily posts on there. I give the conditions of the ice and what we're catching every day on Buckeye Lake. And also when I travel around the country, I have times that I post all the fish that I'm catching down in Florida also. So I appreciate y'all coming out to the show. If you have any questions, feel free to come up.
That's pretty effective on the fiber bass, white bass, that's the same method.
Absolutely. The thing of it is, though, is I can't find them. They travel so much. They move. There are monsters, okay? The hybrids, when I get into them, like I'll see them hitting the top water or whatever, or else I'll know they're in the area.
Got fish in the box. Fish in the box. 2-man limit. 2 days in a row. Yeah.
Make sure I got the right amount. Make sure I got the right amount. 2 more. Right?
Should be 1 more, right?
Yep. One big one.
And there's a 2-man limit. I see eyes.
Let me get a picture.